Firstly, on behalf of Motorsport Australia, I'd like to welcome you tonight to the series production EV webinar that is put together off the back of the release for the standing and technical regulations. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all calling in from this evening and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So as I mentioned, welcome. Thank you for the interest in this evening's webinar. At last check, we had 90 people register their interest, and we're getting close to those numbers jumping online to listen in this evening. And we'll do our very best to pass on some of the information that's been gathered over the last really 2 years before these regulations, both standing and technical, have been released. So before we get going, I will put out a reminder that the purpose of this evening is to give you some information from our end, but we'd also encourage you to send through any questions that you have via the Q&A button, which you can find in the center of your screen down the bottom. If you click on that, you'll be able to type through any questions. I will also remind you, if you could put your name and an email address alongside the questions when you fire them through, then we'll be able to reference who has sent that question and answer it for the group. This evening's webinar will be recorded, and if you're not able to sit in for the full hour, then by all means jump back onto the Motorsport Australia website over starting from tomorrow. This webinar will be put up there, and any questions that we don't answer tonight we'll be able to get back to and upload onto the Motorsport Australia website for people to check in on. I will also, before we get going, I'd just like to explain that the release of all the EV regulations will be done in stages, and that the release of the series production EV regulations are step one in this process of our release. We don't have a confirmed date for the release of competition EV regulations, which is where a lot of questions have been fired at us. But as such, I'd like to ask that any questions relating to competition EV regulations be held until those regulations are released. And tonight's webinar is purely focused on the series production EVs. So if we could respect that, that would be terrific. I'd like to introduce a panel this evening that's going to help with this webinar. This panel has been put together off the back of an electric vehicle working group that I mentioned earlier. We spent 2 years and I sat on that group along with my colleagues that are on our panel this evening. We gathered information from all around the globe and our FIA counterparts to basically build the framework and submit that to Motorsport Australia, where they were able to do the hard yards and put these regulations together for us. So the three gentlemen are very, very well esteemed in their previous roles and working lives. But at the moment, I'll start with introducing Robert Chadwick. And what we're going to do this evening is break pretty much into 3 pillars, and any questions that come through, I will try and direct to the relevant panelist to answer in their expertise of area. So the first one was Rob Chadwick. He'll be looking after technical regulations. Give us a wave, Rob, or say hello if you like. Rob was and still is the chair of the electric vehicle working group. So his expertise has been very much drawn upon throughout the last 2 years, and he's led that group unbelievably well. And I feel like he's done a terrific job to be able to submit the information required to get us to where we are today. Rob Chadwick also currently sits on both the National Technical Committee and Eligibility Committee for Motorsport Australia, while also being called upon for any major incident investigations. Rob has also had a very successful career in the automotive industry as a design manager, development manager, and also was Rally Art Australia manager. So he comes with a wealth of knowledge. Thanks for joining us tonight, Rob. Given that we've got 2 Robs, it gets a bit tricky here. So we'll refer to Robert Styling as our second panelist. So Robert Styling will be directing all questions relating to officials and safety to Robert. And once again, wealth of knowledge in this area from Robert, and we're very privileged to have him join us this evening. Robert has been involved in motorsport fire and rescue since 1985 and was the Deputy Chief Fire Marshal for the Australian Grand Prix from 2001 through until 2016 before being promoted to the Chief Fire Marshal in 2017, and he continues to hold that position now. So they don't hand out that responsibility very easily. So Rob, he clearly does a brilliant job within that space. He's also an accredited trainer for Motorsport Australia and the South Australian Country Fire Service. And in his professional career has been a very experienced HR executive and also CEO. So we welcome Robert into tonight's panel. And then our third panelist is Scott Mcgraw. And the questions that Scott will be looking after tonight will be relating to event organisers, which no doubt there'll be plenty of those come through. Scott is currently Motorsport Australia's technical manager, and I'm going to hand over to Scott now. He's put together a couple of an information PowerPoint that he'll run us through, and he'll be able to screen share so that we can all follow through Scott's conversation and points within that PowerPoint. He'll also run us through the frequently asked questions sheet that was put up on the MA website when the regulations were released. So I'll hand over to Scott, and you can take over here for a little bit.
Thanks, Andrew. And also I want to thank all those attendees that have joined this forum. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so what I aim to do here is just really provide a brief overview of what the current situation is in regards to EVs under Motorsport Australia. All right, so the first point to note is that the EV appendix has now been published online at motorsport.org.au. When you go to our website, there's a range of tabs across the top of the screen. And if you look at the regulations tab and go down to the manual section, that'll then open up so that we get a range of different appendixes related to the sport. And in that is the EV appendix. There's two main documents, obviously the standing regulations, information for event organisers and officials. This sets the criteria that event organisers are to consider in the development of EV safety plans, and provides information for officials on the management of EV incidents and other related matters. The second section that we published is the technical regulations. And again, this is regulation to provide the technical requirements for a series production EV. We've also published EV FAQ, again online at motorsport.org.au. The EV FAQ has been published as a further source of information related to EVs. As an FAQ, it will be continually updated. So at the moment, it's pretty brief and only covering certain points, but as we continue on our journey, we will undertake to update that as regularly as possible. Just want to cover off some key points, and I'm going to go through this essentially in three main areas. The first area being for event organisers. For the permit application, at this stage there'll be no major change except that an EV safety plan will be required. As far as the EV safety plan goes, a template will be provided by Motorsport Australia. I guess this is where I confess that I'm still working, and we are still working through the template itself, because we want to make sure it's right. And we also want to make sure that we can present it in perhaps a range of platforms that will make it as easy as possible for the organisers to complete that safety plan. We're not trying to be overly onerous in the development of these safety plans. It's really to assist event organisers in understanding what things they may need from that perspective for their event. Also so that we can track and look at any issues or areas where there are issues for event organisers with development of safety for EVs. And obviously, what we're also focusing on is that whilst we are very experienced in motorsport, given many of the things that we do from event organisers, competitors, etc., EVs are different. Now, we're not necessarily saying that they're any greater risk to the current internal combustion engine vehicles, but they are different. So it does take a different approach to management. At events, obviously, there may be some variations needed to manage officials to suit EVs, and that may be, again, related to the various resources that event has, whether it be PPE or various other things that officials may need in the management of EV incidents. And for competitors, obviously there's some variations that may be needed to suit their specific needs for their EV, with charging plans being one that may need to be considered. Obviously, you know, a lot of venues are, nearly all venues are not really equipped as yet for specific and dedicated EV charging platforms. So this is a process, obviously, we're looking to assist with where possible. And the next key point I want to address really is just event officials. And obviously the main focus is the variations in incident response for an EV against an ICE engine vehicle. We have released a base introduction to EV package available online through the member portal. This really is just a very base introduction to EV training. So hopefully those who have the capabilities to do so can jump on the member portal and find their way through to the officials training section and just run themselves through that. There are further training packages that are to come online soon, and these will be specifically related to incident response, and then also a scrutineering package under development. Obviously, it's envisaged that with the introduction restricted to series production EVs, it will enable time to become familiar with, obviously, EVs participating in the sport, and we can understand further what that means for the sport as we look to introduce competition EVs. Key points for competitors. As we've discussed, we're commencing this program for series production EVs, and again for really up to that sort of speed event level of event, and some participation in certain rally events. The keys in this are that at this stage, the series production EVs will essentially remain unmodified in the EV systems. So that the EV systems that incorporated into the vehicle are not permitted at this stage to be modified. We are looking for the competitors to have buy-in on emergency response guides. So emergency response guides are essentially released by each of the vehicle manufacturers specific to that vehicle, whether it be a Tesla or a Nissan Leaf or other EV, and they are publicly available. So within the technical appendix and the standing regulations, there are links for where people can access that. One area that does seem to work quite well here in Australia is ANCAP have released, ANCAP being the body that does the regulatory look at vehicle safety as far as occupant safety for general road vehicles. They've released an app which is freely available at most of your app stores. And within that app, there's essentially emergency response guides for a lot of vehicles. So that's also worth looking out for. As for, and it's a question that's come up a lot, is what are we doing about classing for EVs? And to be honest, at this stage, we think it's just poignant to get EVs out participating in the sport, and the actual classing considerations will be in the next phase of the regulation development. When I say classing, it's like, you know, does an EV with a certain battery capacity and power output going to be classed differently to one with a higher output? And then the next phase of that will be what correlation between EVs and internal combustion engines can be done for classification. So whether there's any correlation down the track that we can do where EVs can compete, I guess, certainly in speed events and hill climbs being a good example, head-to-head against their ICE their counterparts. There is a logbook requirement for series production EVs, and the primary reason for this is that we feel a need to ensure that we can effectively track, record, and monitor the introduction of EVs. And we're looking to tailor the process of EVs, including application forms, etc., and that'll be coming soon. we don't necessarily want this to be an onerous thing that or a deterrent for people to have to get a logbook. So for the short term, as we'll see later in the FAQ, Motorsport Australia at permit application process will work directly with event organisers to phase in the requirements for logbooks. So as an event organiser, as you do your permit application, please feel free to send us an additional note saying, you want to consider it and discuss with Motorsport Australia how we can phase in the logbooks. And it's highly likely that, we're happy to consider permitting, an EV to compete 2, 3 odd times, up to 4 times sort of thing, prior to the logbook becoming compulsory. All right, that's all I've got to offer at this stage for that introduction. The next phase I'll look at is to the FAQ, and we'll just run quickly through that for you. All right, so the FAQ here. All right, hopefully you can also that. The FAQ, as I said, is published online. One way to access that is through this regulations tab here, down to Motorsport Australia, manual, down to electric vehicle appendix, and within the electric vehicle appendix is a link to this FAQ. So you'll note that there's a number of things within the FAQ. I've already discussed some of them. So for now, we'll just basically give you a brief introduction to where we're at with this. One of the questions, the first one's is what electric vehicles? And as we've discussed, we're at this stage sticking with series production EV, and that's defined within those regulations. So competition EVs are a work in progress, and we are continuing to undertake work to achieve that. What type of events for EVs? So the initial rollout is for auto test speed and suitable rally road events. There's a question here regarding event organisers to permit EVs. And again, as we've just sort of discussed, the EV safety plan will be the critical. There's obviously requirements for officials involved in any incident response and necessary PPE, fire response, the venue or property owner responsibilities, etc. So obviously the permitted series production EVs are legal to be used on the road. So why do organisers have to do these additional requirements? Well, I guess the main reason being is that this is motorsport, and so we offer in a high risk environment than the general road. Secondly, any incident that occurs in a motorsport environment is the responsibility of the event organisers and those officials at the event, so we need to be prepared for that. One of the questions that pops up regularly is why do we need the venue or property owner responsible persons to confirm they're aware that an EV is going to an event? And this really ties in with obligations at an event from Motorsport Australia to the event organiser, and where relevant, venue or property owner responsible persons. And for us, it's important that all those who have responsibilities are informed so that they can complete their own risk assessment as necessary. So we want to make sure that the venue and the responsible persons for the venue itself, be it racetrack or hill climb venue or other type of venue or facility, are aware that EVs are coming to participate, so that if they have any concerns or things like that, they can seek to discuss with Motorsport Australia or the event organiser, and we can work as a group to achieve outcomes to suit. Obviously, the training we've discussed. And there's also another discussion question here regarding, as I've just discussed, the Motorsport Australia logbook and some of the reasons why. So that's a brief introduction to the FAQ. And yeah, we're certainly going to undertake to update this as regularly as possible. So for those who are getting involved in it, please do touch base on that regularly. That's probably it from me. I'll pass back over to Andrew.
Terrific. Well done, Scott. And big shout out to Scott and his team. Although the electric vehicle working group really did a lot of work on the framework, once that was built and done and passed over to Scott and his team, they've put it into the regulations that we've all seen be released. And no doubt the 90 odd people that have joined this webinar this evening are as excited as we all are on the release of this first phase of series production EV. So thanks very much, Scott, and everybody within your team. So we might, from here, we might just go into the Q&A section of this evening. I will remind you that there is the option via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in the center. If you just click on that, it will open up a page where you can type through some questions, and I'll go through those and direct them to the relevant expert within the panel. I did mention earlier that if you could put your name and an email address along with your question, that name, the email address or any details that are personal will not be released to the group. So if anybody has any concerns on that front, we won't be releasing them publicly. But any questions, fire them through. We'll do our absolute best to answer them. So we'll start off. First question that I can see here that's come through from Reese Yeamans. Hopefully I've pronounced that right, Reese. I might hand this one to Scott. I think you'll be first up off the blocks here, mate. We had a non-production EV compete at the Australian Hill Climb Championship in 2018 at Bryant Park. Big shout out to anybody from Bryant Park. Car is from ACT from memory. Under these current guidelines, would they not be allowed to enter a speed event? Over to you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thank you, Reese, for your question. Yeah, look, this is probably somewhat contentious, and I'll pretty much straight shoot this in that with the introduction of EV regulations, we have balanced our approach with a bit of a softly outcome. So initially, we are focused on series production EVs. The main reason being is that for a series production EV to be permitted on the road, it has to meet a whole range of necessary requirements and regulations, whether that be established under design rules for a country or whether that be established internationally, with one of the main international players in the EV space being the UN and United Nations combined regulations for vehicles. With that, we then have a very clear understanding of what the technical specifications of those vehicles are, and also the safety systems that are inbuilt, including safety redundancy systems, where if there's a certain failure of one electrical element of the vehicle, it can automate a control system to shut that down and prevent issues. So when we come to a non-series production EV, or what we will call a competition EV, we have to now work to develop regulations on how those vehicles are to be constructed, and also how those vehicles are to achieve sort of similar levels of compliance and safety conditions, where they can be monitored effectively and where can be sure that the risk of electric shock and those kinds of things to our officials and marshals can be effectively managed. So at this point in time, we are very aware that competition EVs are not yet permitted to participate under a Motorsport Australia permit, and that we're commencing with series production EVs. But we have a lot of work that is going on in the space for competition EVs. So I guess just watch this space and we'll see where it goes. I'm pretty sure we're all aware of that particular vehicle in Canberra as well. And I'm pretty sure the gentleman who owns that vehicle has actually been actively involved with us on our EV working group. So hopefully that covers that off for you at this stage.
Thanks, Scott. Next question we'll get into, because they're starting to flood in thick and fast, is from Paul Bauer. And I'll direct this one to Rob Chadwick. The question is, will it be necessary for series production EV vehicles to have a logbook at all levels of motorsport? And I know Scott touched on this during his frequently asked questions presentation, but we'll let Rob Chadwick answer this one for the group.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Paul, for the question. Yes, they will require a logbook, and as Scott's explained, as an evolving technology and where cars are running, we're very keen to track where they are and what they're doing, and also the requirement of the ERG means that there is some additional responsibility on the competitor when they're entering it. So yes, all electric vehicles will be required to have a logbook. Back to you, Andrew.
Terrific. Thanks, Rob. Next question comes from Mark Rossiter. Firstly, he says, thank you for the release of the regulations. It's been a long time coming. Glad you're excited about that, Mark. As I mentioned, we all are also. He says here, as the operations manager for Wanneroo Raceway, we run under the top car permit for come and try days. competition driving school and driver tuning events. What regulations do I and my members need to comply to non-competition events? Scott Mcgraw, I'll fire this one to you. You're in the hot seat at the minute.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Mark, for your question. Look, regarding Top Car, I think, Mark, it might be best if we take that offline and I can discuss that directly with you. Essentially, Top Car has certain conditions that are applied to it. And obviously that applies that, vehicle specifications and things like that must to some extent mirror and match those as published by Motorsport Australia. So I think for that specific question, if you could contact me offline, I think you've got my details, and we can come back with that. So do you want me to go straight into the second question as well there, Andrew?
Yeah, if you're happy to answer that, Scott, or whether it's one for Rob Chadwick, up to you guys. Yeah,
Rob's nodding. So while I'm here, so a general purpose outlet is your standard household 10 amp 3-prong plug-in for a power point, which are not suited or designed for charging of electric vehicles, as per the investigations we've done. Who's to say that doesn't change in the future? But for now, that's the case. I do believe, however, that there are 3-phase systems that can be incorporated. So at this point in time, I would say that, yeah, certainly you're free to investigate the use of the 3-phase that you have on site. And if that's suitable for those EV vehicles that will be participating at your event. Hopefully that covers that for you, Mark.
Terrific. Thanks, Scott. Next question comes in from Paul Freem. And Paul says, are FCEV/hydrogen cars included in these regs? We might fire this one to Rob Chadwick. Rob?
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, Paul. No, not at this time. At the moment, we're focusing on the hybrid or battery EVs, but undoubtedly that will be something need to be included further down the road.
Terrific, thank you. Next question, Paul Salcombe. Whose responsibility will it be to provide the additional EV safety equipment, for example, a water bath or specialised extinguishers? I think this sits in your area, Robert Styling, so we'll let you answer this one.
And when I take my computer off mute, I'll be able to do that. Thanks, Andrew. Look, I think the responsibility of every event organiser is to make sure that they've got the appropriate equipment. Whether they choose to have a significant water bath or not, I suppose that's something that we will need to develop moving forward. Essentially, each of the car, if there's an incident in the car, it should be treated like a normal car fire initially. The evidence shows us that thermal runaways, even in accidents of vehicles, is quite rare. There is a new foam product called FP500 that is developed to deal with thermal runaways, and from the research that I've done, that pricing is very similar to the current cost of a 9-litre foam extinguisher anyway. But as far as the responsibility, I think whether Rob Chadwick can answer that, I think it's incumbent on the event organiser to ensure that those safety systems are in place.
I might even hand over to you for that one, Scott. You've got some further information to add.
Yeah, look, I think ultimately, as with all events, the responsibilities really start with the event organiser. Now, event organisers may then, depending on the type of event, undertake to either contract external resources for certain fire responses or things like that. And that's something that you may typically see at certain state level events, for instance. At an average state race event, for instance, the event organiser is organising that and they've contracted the local either fire and recovery club to provide resources, or they've undertaken it with a private supplier. So Also, the venue may have some certain responsibilities, and it may depend on what the venue is also considering and what support they can provide. Yeah, moving forward, obviously, we're working very closely at the moment and looking at the fire response equipment that we can delve into there. As for the other equipment, again, really, you know, it is the responsibility of event organisers working with, you know, venues and the other officials at events to ensure the coverage of equipment as necessary, as is the case with internal combustion engines, where, you know, there's still a range of safety resources and requirements that are required for events to cover off on. Hopefully that covers that for now, Andrew.
Yep, absolutely. Well done. Thank you. I was just toying up whether to mention or fire out an apology to Corey Dyer. Corey asked, are we all automatically on mute? And yes, mate, you are all automatically on mute. So thank you for your question. We will try and get to everybody. Next one is Gavin Cruikshank. Gavin says he's a member of the Porsche Club of Queensland, where the club holds club sprint events under the control of Motorsport Australia. He says he's working on a Porsche 928 EV conversion and was wondering what are the technical requirements of vehicles to compete in Motorsport Australia Car Club EV sprint events. And then he further goes on to say, for an example, I have SAS racing seats and considering a half roll cage and adjustable coilover suspension. It will be certified for street public road registration, but assume additional track requirements, for example, fire extinguisher or external electric isolator. This might be a question for Rob Chadwick, if you'd like to answer this one.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the question, Gavin. With any of the safety equipment that's added into a production vehicle, it needs to ensure that it doesn't interfere or change, modify, or affect any of the electric components. So if people are adding such things as seats and rollover protection into a production vehicle, then you have to be very conscious that you're not modifying or potentially influencing the performance of the electric components, as it's, you know, mandated that it has to be standard. So as far as an EV converted, then yes, all the standard mechanical changes are still potentially permitted underneath the rules, and the electric components need to be protected. Scott, you might like to jump in and add anything on there?
Yep, certainly. So in this particular case, Gavin, obviously you've advised that you've got an existing conventional internal combustion vehicle, a Porsche 928, and you're looking to do an EV conversion on that vehicle. At this point in time, we would treat that vehicle as a competition EV. And yeah, I suggest what we do is undertake some communication once you start undertaking the build, and we can work through what we consider requirements for that if it is indeed a competition EV.
Terrific. Thanks, gents, and thanks, Gavin, for that question. Hopefully there's a bit to consume there for you. Next one is Luke Smith. Luke says, hi, do you have a rough budget for the PPE that we will need to have at a typical road car sprint event? This one for you, Robert Starling. Hopefully you can give us some general costs.
I don't know about general costs, but I could tell you about the equipment. Certainly from an official's perspective, if you are going to be involved in trackside operations, either as a fire marshal or a track marshal, you'd certainly be looking at some sort of protective coveralls. Generally, the fire marshals need to be certified to FAI standards. Sometimes, depending on what category, there will be a variety of people that need balaclavas and hats. Balaclavas are probably about $40 a shot. And depending on the type of gloves that are needed, they could range from, and I'm sorry, I'm not so specific here, but they can range from riggers gloves right up to the F1 Kers type gloves, which have a cotton lining, then a rigger type glove within a rubber overlay. they would certainly be something that you'd need to be looking at if someone was trapped in a vehicle and you were doing a rescue. But a lot of that stuff's in the training. But as far as a budget goes, look, I haven't personally bought that stuff for a long time, but I would suggest a set of PPE, overalls and a coat would be in the vicinity of $400. Then you've got balaclavas and gloves, but that's assuming that you're talking about an individual cost. If you want costings for an event organizer, I think obviously that's something that we'd probably deal with offline and have a look at the indications in the regs about what we think's required.
Yeah, Andrew, I might just jump in and just add a few additional comments, just to Robert's there. So we are becoming aware that obviously there is a cost associated with the participation of EVs and event organisers preparing for it. One avenue that Motorsport Australia is looking at is obviously we have a range of grant programs and club development funds and things like that. So certainly where clubs are seeking to add additional equipment to support EVs, that would certainly be a consideration for access to those funds through those programs that are already established. One of the areas we've been thinking as well that may assist, and we're working through ways we can better communicate this, is for clubs that are in certain regions, or whether certain regions can buddy up together, with a group of clubs to develop a kit that can go from event to event to provide that additional PPE and resource equipment for electric vehicles participating. It may be as simple as half a dozen sets of electric gloves to facilitate that, an AED, and a few other of the basic criteria, that obviously extrication hook and things like that. So yeah, there are some ways and means that clubs themselves could start to consider working together to achieve that. And as I said, also looking to access grant funding where it may be available. Again, this is a development of the sport. So in all development things, hopefully we can find some funding at some stage to facilitate that.
Andrew, I can probably just add another string to that bow. I've just had a look here. I mean, other than the normal types of safety equipment that officials are currently using, in addition, we'd look at protection against electrical hazards. So there's gloves. For those that are doing a rescue, it's a helmet with a face mask, and electrical protective footwear and the electrical hook. They're not something that every marshal would need to do. So a marshal that is already working in the internal combustion engine space or those other areas would be reasonably adequately protected. And then in the guidelines, we talk about, as in a normal, even with an internal combustion area, car area, it would be make the vehicle safe. So understand if you're in an event with an electric vehicle, understand where all the shutoffs are, that sort of stuff. Because once you kill the high tension voltage, then the car is fairly easy to work on. So again, it's understanding the surrounds that you've got, and do like a dynamic risk assessment when they turn up to the job. What are the hazards? Understand the training, and they should be well protected in what they do.
Terrific. Thank you, gentlemen. I feel like you guys have covered that very, very well. And if I just scroll down through our questions here, there was one very similar from Michael Fittler. What MA requirements are there for event organisers and officials for special safety equipment, such as AEDs, defibrillators, and PPE high voltage gloves? So fair portion of your question, Michael, I believe was just answered then, but maybe I'll fire this one to you, Scott, regarding the AEDs.
Yeah, so if you undertake to have a look at the EV standing regulations information for officials and organisers, there's a list of criteria in there, and it does have some information in regards to AEDs. So yeah, if you need further, please do reach out to us directly.
Thanks, Scott. Another question from Paul Salcombe. He says, will EVs be allowed in garages at venues given the higher risk of significant fire, especially with the high load temp battery packs are under at track days? I'll go back to you again, Scott.
Yeah, look, ultimately that will be a question that will be considered by the event organisers and the venues. Yeah, it's not necessarily a Motorsport Australia decision at this point in time to say yes or no to EVs being allowed in garages. Again, with the right risk management framework in place, I don't necessarily see it as being any greater issue than refueling an ICE vehicle in a garage, or storing 60+ litres of fuel, and in some cases I've seen a lot more than that in a garage at a racetrack. So yeah, I suggest that question will defer to event organisers and the venue operators.
Thanks, Scott. Next question is from Scott Wordley, and Scott says, as many on our panel would be aware, we already have a competition EV event that has been running for many years called Formula SAE Electric. Do we foresee any impacts of these production regulations on that event, or does it continue unaffected until the release of the competition EV rules?
I'll jump in on this one, Andrew.
Thanks, Rob.
G'day, Scott. Nice to hear from you. Scott, as you be aware, the Formula SAE runs underneath a Motorsport Australia permit, but the rules are Formula SAE rules, and therefore it will continue that way. So my quick answer to you is no, I don't expect there will be any change. And once we get into the rules, we will be doing a look-see of them, comparing the two alongside. But from my previous knowledge of the rules, fundamentally the same protections, etc., will be included in both. So I don't envisage any significant change, if any, going forward, but we will look at that as we go forward. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to keep blazing through these. We've got a fair few here, and I'm conscious of time. So Bruce Asprey from MSCA of Victoria. He says, thanks guys for this evening's webinar. Has there been any discussion with venue or circuit owners to provide a suitable water bath on site? Scott, this one's you again.
Yeah, hi Bruce, and thanks for joining in the forum. Look, essentially, Bruce, the answer is no. We have not directly reached out to all the venues at this point in time. It really is a consideration for the venue whether they'll undertake that piece of work. As I said, our main focus is trying to understand, what the greater outcome is for incident response, and now having done some investigations into some of the extinguishers and things like that are currently available, and some information will be released on that further shortly, such as the F500, which Rob Styling's already discussed. We believe that that's going to present probably at this point in time the most suitable outcome to the management of an EV fire. So stand by, and it may be that down the track, venues may consider water baths as an option, but our position is to hopefully avoid that. And yeah, hopefully in the short term, there can be good usage of other alternative fire extinguisher mediums that have become available recently. Hopefully that sorts it for you, Bruce. Otherwise, do reach out afterwards and we can chat further.
Yeah, definitely answers that question, Scott. Thank you. I'll add to that as well that, in this space, we are very early on, and really with the release of these standing and technical regulations, the basis for them is mitigation of risk. And that's really the thing that we all need to keep at the forefront of our mind at the minute. Next question, Luke Smith. Thanks for checking in, and I'd like to make this known, fire Luke's question out there, given that it lets everybody know we're not filtering anything. So Luke says, it does seem that MA has been very slow to catch up, given Formula E has been running since 2014. Scott, you look like you're excited to answer this one for Luke.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty fair point. And certainly we've been watching Formula E quite closely and seeing now how that develops. I guess in short, Formula E has a rather significant budget behind it and has specifically been developed in the EV space. As far as EVs go, it is quite complicated, and the management methods that they incorporate for event organisers are extensive, to say the least. We're happy to obviously, look at further, and we will be certainly looking at what Formula E are doing in the development of our competition EV regulation. But yes, we do acknowledge Formula E has been around for a while, but it is extremely well funded, extremely well supported by specific and well-known vehicle manufacturers. And again, the requirements for events to run a Formula E organisers is significant.
Terrific. Thanks, Scott. And I think you're right. It's been running since 2014. We're now in 2022. And what are they up to? Gen 6 of Formula E cars. So the development rate really in that space has allowed us to be able to tap into that, look for that information, and then try and use that information out to the broader motorsport world. It would have been remiss of us to have tried to compete or open regulations in line with what that space was doing. So thanks, Luke. Next question. I'll go to Damien White, has sent through a question. Will the answer to the top car question be shared more broadly? Scott? 2 thumbs up from Scott. So he says, yes, it will be. As I mentioned at the start, this evening's webinar is recorded, and any questions that we don't answer here tonight will be made available publicly. They'll be put up onto the Motorsport Australia website and be shared so that everybody can see the relevant answers to each question. Paul Salcombe's another question. Will there be changes to the driver's apparel for EVs to better protect against high voltage? And will they need a different in-car extinguisher? We'll go to you, Robert Styling.
Can't see that they'll need a different in-car extinguisher. Certainly a powder extinguisher in the initial event of a fire. I mean, we don't have in electric vehicles the sudden and immediate explosive fires that we see in internal combustion engine fires. Well, not that I've seen. It takes some time for those fires to develop to get to that intensity. So a normal dry chemical extinguisher for use by the driver or somebody close by to actually get the driver free from the vehicle is more than sufficient. And as far as protective clothing, there's pretty extensive work in the regs that we've put out about cut-offs and where wiring should be, all that sort of stuff. So I can't see that a driver is any more at risk in a properly regulated electric vehicle than they would be in a equally properly regulated internal combustion engine carrying 60, 100 litres of fuel behind them, underneath them, around them, wherever. So I think standards as they are now cover those. And it's really more the, if there is an impact on high voltage, that sort of stuff, it'd be very difficult to protect anybody against that if there was an accident with the high voltage equipment. But like all things, you can mitigate risk as much as you want, but there's always that one thing that nobody foresees. So I hope that answers your question. You're on mute, Andrew.
What, sorry, while you're there, Rob.
Yeah.
Trying to do too many things at once. I'll get you to answer the next question that's come through from Corey Dyer. Is it recommended that clubs perhaps consider Purple K for thermal run away also?
There's a whole lot of stuff that is around. It depends on what clubs' budgets are, I suppose. But as I said, from our perspective, the dry powder stuff is for fires, and it looks like the F500 foam is going to be the go for containing that. And as others have said, there's a heap of research going on at the moment. So all I can say is certainly something that people could look at, depending on what your budget is.
Thanks, Robert. A couple of questions coming through here that all look like they're sort of in the same area of questions. So one from Sonia, one from Paul, and one from Chavi Kataria. I'll go with Chavi's question, and he says, we have been, or she, we have been told by Formula SAE that competitors will have to comply with the recently published regulations. From this seminar, it appears that the released regulations are more applicable to series production EVs, and there will be a later release for competition EVs. Is that correct? I might fire that one to Robert Chadwick. This looks like a space that you're familiar with.
Yeah, it is, Andrew. Look, from a vehicle regulation point of view, the Formula SAE rules are quite mature. And I don't see that there will be a change in the EV rules at this time for Formula SAE. But for the event organiser of both Formula Student and Formula SAE, they'll need to take into account the Motorsport Australia guidelines for the event organisers. So there's a little bit to be looked at there, but I don't think there's anything that's significant nor anything that will affect this year's competition. Back to you, Andrew.
Okay, terrific. Thanks for that, Rob. And I might also throw to Scott, because you're really at the forefront of this space from within MA. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, certainly. I guess first and foremost, if Formula SAE is a well-established program, it runs under its own specific technical regulations, including the technical regulations specific to FSAE EVs. Now, those regulations are probably similar to what we're looking at as far as competition EVs. We won't necessarily delve directly into the FSAE space. They are well tuned and well capable of managing that. So our involvement will be, I guess, for the event organisers associated with that, and where it comes under a permit for Motorsport Australia. So otherwise, we're not here to really address or affect FSAE and their specific technical regulations for their EVs. And yeah, we'll move on from that at this point in time. And yeah, I'm sure it'll be a further discussion later.
Andrew, can I just jump in on one question that came from Paul Freem there? He asked if a Formula SAE car comes to a speed event. Can I just make the point that a Formula SAE car arriving at a speed event will have to comply to one of the categories of a speed event. Formula SAE isn't a category under speed event. It runs under its own event and event regulations. So if a Formula SAE car attends a speed event, it will have to be compliant to a category currently recognised by Motorsport Australia under the speed event regulations. Scott, do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's essentially the case. Formula SAE vehicles are built to their rules. Our regulations related to that would be Formula Libera for speed events, and our requirements often differ in that case. And the main reason being is that FSAE run on very controlled environments when it comes to the circuits and the tests that they do, whereas rocking up to a hill climb's a whole different environment.
Okay, thanks, gentlemen. I think you answered that very, very well. And there's lots of Formula SAE questions coming through in that space. So no doubt, if there's anything after this meeting or webinar that you would like answered, by all means, just contact Motorsport Australia, and we're always happy to answer questions. The next one coming through is from Bevan Pulling, and Bevan says, are EV competition rules likely to be announced in the 2022 calendar year? Terrific question, and back to you for this one, Scott.
Look, it's a work in progress. Certainly, I see that by the end of this year, we'll be able to provide an update on where we're at. But yeah, at this stage, I suggest it'll be into 2023 when we finalise competition EV regulation this time.
Yeah, we're very much at the early phase of EV competition in Australia. So none of us have a crystal ball at the moment, and we just need to make sure that the process that we're going through is followed, and ultimately that'll determine when we release competition EV regulations. Jeffrey Becker has sent a question through. I'm concerned that there is still a lot of work to be done on extinguishing an EV battery fire. Whilst appreciating the risk may be low, the fire blanket for a vehicle cost is approximately $2,500 each. We might start with Robert Styling, and then Scott, if you've got some more to add after Robert, that would be great.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, I understand what you're saying, but I think that the provision of extinguishers as opposed to fire blankets would be a far more cost-effective way of dealing with a fire, and B, I think a more rapid response. My understanding of the use of fire blankets is once the fire is running away, you throw the fire blanket over the vehicle. I would hope that we can get to a vehicle before that event happens. If you're going to make a water bath, I mean, I don't know what the cost of making a tank that you can get a car into is either, but in my view, it's about personal safety. So first of all, officials and drivers' safety, and then worry about the car afterwards. So from a fire service perspective, most of the time here in Australia, we're using water or foam. So you could choose to use a fire blanket, but that I think would be up to the event organizer as opposed to something that we would direct that each event needs to have. But certainly there's ongoing research, and if that's something we need to consider in the future, it's something that we need to look at. Thanks, Andrew.
Scott, anything to add there?
Yeah, g'day, Jeff, and thanks for joining this forum. Yeah, look, obviously, one of the main areas we're focusing on now is the introduction of this F500 extinguisher agent, which looks like it's going to offer the greatest asset to a fire response for an EV. I'm going to publish more information on that through the FAQ as soon as possible, so I'll try and get that out tomorrow, so keep an eye on that. There's also some forums and things like that have been run and available on YouTube, etc., on this medium. Whilst it does appear to be, slightly more expensive than say your normal regular 9 kilogram extinguisher, it is offered in a whole range of different types, from a 9 kilogram extinguisher all the way up to vats that you can mix yourself to suit larger appliances and things like that. So stand by and we'll have more information on where we're at with the latest firefighting technology for EVs.
Thank you, Scott. Kent Brown, next question. He's from the MG Car Club of Canberra. And Ken says, as an organiser of 4 multi-club motorcarners on behalf of the MG Car Club of Canberra each year, the venue we use is the Transport Industry Skills Centre on Sutton Road. In my permit application, can I state that an EV or hybrids will not be accepted? The problem for us is the cost of purchasing necessary equipment at this stage, training of officials, and the approval of the facility owner. Scott, I'll hand that one to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Look, in short, event organisers are entitled to state even which ICE vehicles are permitted at their events. So, yeah, whilst we want to work with event organisers to permit EVs, if there are problems and an event organiser is not comfortable at this stage, then certainly you don't need to accept an EV at your event. However, we will put ourselves out there to say, if you'd like, assistance to work through the issues you've got, then yeah, do seek to contact us and we can go from there.
Thanks, Scott. Paul Overall has said, will Motorsport Australia assist promoters with bulk purchase of PPE for volunteer officials, either via funding or by coordinating discounts for bulk purchases? I think you touched on this earlier, Scott, in some of the avenues that the promoters are able to access either some grants or some funding or some assistance, if you'd like to just reiterate that.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Paul, for your question. Yeah, we obviously Motorsport Australia has club development funds, and we can look at other resourcing opportunities where necessary. That's obviously a matter that's been discussed with the board of Motorsport Australia and things like that, and certainly is an avenue to reach out through the sport and club development officers to seek that. Otherwise, there may be additional funding resources that clubs and things haven't considered or haven't tapped into. I know in some states there's development for sporting clubs for development of resources for their facilities, and they may be avenues that the clubs can reach out to. Otherwise, Paul, happy to have a further discussion offline and point you in the right direction for personnel here to discuss that with you.
Thanks, Scott. Another good question here that I've just come across from Kieran Pradeep. Kieran's from the New South Wales Road Racing. He says, we've held 2 events so far as part of the state Super Sprint series that allows EVs to participate. He says it's a sweet spot for EVs at the moment. Good to note, Kieran. We had no issues with the cars and really appreciate the support from MA to get EVs on track. Clark Motorsport have provided us with all the extra recovery gear needed. We just had our permit approved for the 27th of August to allow EVs. Would we need any changes to our permit based on anything put forward in these regs today, or will our existing permit hold? That one's for you again, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Look, we work quite closely with the New South Wales Super Sprint panel, Ian Williams, who I'm sure you're familiar with. So yeah, we in development of the planning around that, particularly for the Sydney Motorsport Park venue. So at this stage, no, there'd be no requirement for you to do anything beyond what you have already done and put in place in conjunction with the New South Wales Super Sprint panel. And it's been good to work with, some of these as test cases to see what the next steps for us are. So I appreciate that. Of course, again, if anybody needs any further, please do reach out to us post this forum.
Jacob White is the next question. He says, is MA actively sending track owners and event organisers / clubs information regarding new EV vehicle regs and information that is being discussed tonight to promote more EV events at tracks and club events? Good question. Again, sorry, Scott, you're not getting much time to breathe here, but if you're happy to answer that one.
Yeah, well, certainly our main method is to obviously publish publicly this information on our website, where it is freely accessible to anybody who chooses to go looking for it. We've had releases through our social networks, news articles, even speed cafes published about it. So yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a two-way street for us, where we're looking for those who want to get involved to reach out and access us for that information as well. And then we'll work specifically with those event organisers that are looking to run events. Yeah, that's about it. And we'll certainly keep updating the information as we go, including the FAQ. So
we are running out of a little bit of time here. We could probably go for another 5 minutes. There are a couple of more questions that have jumped out at me. Matthew McPartland says, what are the reference sources for the Motorsport Australia regulations and guidelines? What agencies are conducting the research that Motorsport Australia is relying upon? I might direct this one to Rob Chadwick. If Rob, you've been part of and the chair of the Electric Vehicle Working Group, if you'd like to answer this.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. For the production cars, we've been heavily relying on what's going on in the Australian space with the commercial and rescue vehicles, so the ERGs, etc., which are guiding how people should be addressing production cars. For the competition vehicles, at the moment, our main source of information is the FIA, who have extensive experience with things like Formula E and X Extreme, etc. So, but we're also talking with currently agencies within Australia, and that's probably the biggest challenge we have at the moment, is when we do go for a competition vehicle set of regulations, is to ensure that we are meeting all the agencies in Australia's requirements. And that's an ongoing work in progress. I hope that answers it.
Well done, Rob. Thank you. Couple more left here. Gwyn Mulholland says, from the point of view of smaller clubs that run state hill climbs and club events, is it believed for this policy to continue to be viable? Also notice there has been no mention of respirators at fires. So 2 questions there. I'll let Scott answer that first one in regards to club events and state hill climbs, and then maybe Robert Styling can answer the one around respirators for fires.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Gwyn and Helen, for joining. Well, in short, I guess part of our role in this is to really look at, the addressing the risks of EV participation. We have tried really carefully, particularly for series production EVs, to be as less onerous as we possibly can. The fact is, in this day and age, 2022, we have to have a risk focus. When we look at the history of internal combustion engines, and particularly their introduction to motorsport, the main modus operandum was to have significant incidents, and with that included significant injuries or fatalities, and then address the problem that caused that, and then further and further on as the sport developed. In this space and in this current environment, 2022, we're not really in a position to do EVs that way. So we've chosen to start with series production EVs, to have a reasonable focused approach to assist event organisers and officials in developing the risk coverage. And yeah, we'll continue to work with obviously event organisers to achieve that. And really risk is the number one thing this day and age for us all to deal with, whether it be in our personal lives, in the sport, or certainly in our workplaces, and we have obligations to address that. So hopefully, we can all continue to work together and achieve suitable outcomes. Just quickly, I can also add on face masks and respirators. For those of you that have read and looked through the Electric Vehicle Appendix Standing Regulations information for organisers and officials, there is a section on personal protective equipment, and it does include face mask, respirator, and it is highly recommended that face mask, respirator assist in preventing fumes from responding to a fire, and that the fumes from an EV fire may well be toxic.
Thanks, Scott. Well done. Yes, it's slide 32 on the training package. So it outlines that. We haven't mentioned individual bits and pieces in this webinar, but the information is certainly there on the training. So thanks for the question.
Terrific. Thanks, gentlemen. Last question for this evening comes in from Luke Smith, and he says, how do we reach out to the EV panel or even join it? Which, if you guys are happy to, I can answer this. You can reach out to the EV panel via the Motorsport Australia website. If you just send an email through to there, then it will be redirected to all of the guys that are on this panel tonight. In terms of joining it, the EV panel and the EV working group has been up and going for 2 years, and the group that are on there have continued to, or will continue to sit on that EV working group for a further 12 months. So we appreciate your interest, Luke. But at the moment, that working group will continue. Continuity in this space at the moment, particularly with the work that's been done, as I mentioned, in the last 2 years, is absolutely key for us. But we're always happy to hear from people. So please jump onto the Motorsport Australia website if you've got anything that you want to get through to us, and we'll all be able to collectively answer it. That is all for time, all the time that we have for this evening. We have run over by about 15 minutes. So I'd like to just thank everybody that has attended tonight. At one point there, we're up at 85 participants on this webinar, which is terrific. I would like to say a very big thank you to Robert Styling, Scott Mcgraw, Rob Chadwick, and also Paul Reardon in the background for facilitating this webinar this evening. For sure, the EV space is very much in its infancy. We feel like it's an exciting space, and we appreciate you guys jumping on tonight. We hope that we've been able to deliver you some information, answer the majority of the questions that have come through. We really appreciate the candidness of some of those questions, and effectively, the longer we go into this EV space, the better we're all going to get around it. I would like to also say that Motorsport Australia has done a terrific job. There was a question there around it's taken us a while given that Formula E started in 2014. But I think having been part of this process from the start, I think the process has been followed. You cannot beat a process in this type of environment. And if we continue to follow that, then the regulations that are delivered will be the best for Motorsport Australia members that it can be, event organisers, and we'll continue to keep in touch with our international counterparts at the FIA to make sure that any global information is delivered back to us so that we're at the forefront of it. So I will say thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll all see you at a racetrack somewhere soon. Good night. Take care.